Have you ever sat in that heavy silence at a family dinner? Here on Human Stories, we retell those moments, honest every day, sometimes controversial. Every story is a mirror. Subscribe, join the conversation, and maybe find a little healing. By dusk, the marsh turned the color of steeped tea. The porch swing sighed under my weight, and a glass of sweet tea left a wet ring on the cypress armrest where salt had crusted white. On the far side of the yard, the tide pushed the grass in slow, breathy waves, and the scent of pluff mud rose with the heat that never quite let go in Charleston. Inside, I had set a small supper shrimp I'd boiled with lemon and bay leaf skillet cornbread, a bowl of sliced tomatoes, slick with olive oil and basil. My daughter Paige breezed in barefoot, a summer dress floating around her knees. The man beside her carried himself like a story he already knew the ending to. Matias Delgado offered me a bottle of Malbec, like a peace flag, and kissed the air beside my cheek. His Spanish rolled low and warm, the vowels soft, different from the Spanish I'd heard all my life around the boatyard. We ate with the windows open and the ceiling fan clacking out its own impatient rhythm. Paige took the chair nearest the window where the evening light found her hair. Matias sat at the far end, a place men choose when they'd like to see the whole table at once. There was talk of fireworks on the 4th, a band playing down by the Battery, a new taco place on Spring. Matias described old summers in Buenos Aires, the river, the crowds, the football matches where the whole city sang. Then so small you could miss it if you didn't know what to listen for. He tilted his head toward Paige and let his voice drop a degree. He didn't change languages so much as slip into a shade of the same, letting the rounded lift of a Rio Platense accent turn words to velvet. La escritura, amor, he murmured. La transferencia. Si firmas, nos vamos de Charleston después del 4. Todo listo. See? The fan kept clacking. A boat horn sounded faintly upriver. I eased my fork back to the plate to keep from clattering. Paige's smile flickered, then steadied. She answered with a nervous little laugh, Más tarde hablamos, and glanced at me as if to check which world I belonged to. I learned my Spanish at Benjamin's elbow, back when my husband's hands still smelled like cedar and varnish. We kept a crew from Guatemala and Veracruz through the 80s and 90s men who sanded hulls until the wood turned to satin and taught me without meaning to how certain words thud or cut or sing. Benjamin used to say you can hear a lie the way you hear a rotten rib in a boat tap once and the sound goes hollow. He's been gone 2 summers now. The house he restored plank by plank sits at the edge of the marsh like the last hull he ever brought back to life. Try the tomatoes, I said, because my voice had to do something ordinary. They're good this time of year. Matias looked up at the crown molding, not the food. This house, he said, she is very seguro, stable. His eyes tracked the window sash, the door frames, the line where the floorboards ran true. Paige touched his wrist, proud of him for admiring what her father built. Daddy called it the Marsh house, she said. He swore the porch was the best place on earth to tell the truth. Then keep me out there, Matias joked. Paige laughed too quickly and poured him more wine. When I stood to fetch more ice, they followed me with their conversation, as if it were a ribbon they could tug. At the sink, with my back turned and the faucet running, I heard him again. No te preocupes. Con poder notarial es más fácil. Firma y mañana vemos al notario. Don't worry. With power of attorney, it's easier. Sign and tomorrow we'll see the notary. I crushed the ice bag against the counter with a clean, sharp blow, the same way Benjamin used to set a stubborn plank firm, but without anger. When I returned, the ribbon of their talk had turned back to English. Fireworks, the band, the tacos. Whenever Matias needed to make a promise he couldn't keep, he borrowed a word that sounded official, seguro notario, transferencia, and floated it like a raft between them. We finished late. The gnats came out in white halos around the porch lanterns, and the cicadas wound up their tinny engine. Matias rose first, collecting his jacket and kissing the air again, 1-2. Thank you, Senora Hayes, he said. Everything was perfect. Drive safe, I told them. Paige kissed my cheek and smelled like basil and wine, and something nervous. At the door, she turned back. Don't wait up, Mom, she said lightly, which was what she always said when she did not want me waiting on anything at all. I stood a while at the railing after their headlights slipped away, hands on the flat, worn wood, where salt had chewed the varnish. The river pushed a little harder. A train sounded far off toward the peninsula. Heat thundered in the live oaks like a storm that refused to break. The porch swing creaked once like a question. I went to Benjamin's desk. It still held the gouges from a time he set a chisel down too hard the day we learned the cancer had a name. In the top drawer lay the small leather notebook he carried in his back pocket until the stitching gave. I opened to a clean page, wrote the date, the exact time by the kitchen clock with the blue rooster. Then the words I had heard as close to the sound as I could catch them, escritura, transferencia poder notario mañana. I added what I knew about the shape of Matthias's voice, the tuck of the S and the softness of the LL, and the way Paige looked away before she answered. I wrote down stable, then crossed it out and put seguro instead. Some words keep their true color when you don't translate them. When I finished, I let my hand rest on the page until the ink lost its shine. The house clicked and settled around me. Out on the porch, a moth battered itself against the lantern glass until it found the dark. I put the notebook back, not in the desk where anyone might look, but behind the row of boat plans Benjamin had rolled into a dented coffee can. I washed the glasses, stacked the plates, wiped a ring of tea from the cypress rail that the night air had turned sticky again. In the yard, the tide had reached its high and paused. The marsh held its breath. I listened until the first suggestion of falling returned a thread of water slipping back through the grass, the river's quiet proof that every rise carries its own ending. I turned off the porch light. The swing moved a little in the dark, and I let the night take the last of the voices with it. I did not confront anyone. I did not pick a fight I could not win at my own table. I chose the thing I could make with my hands a record clean as a cut, straight as a plank. Then I went to bed and lay awake counting the beats between the fan's clicks, rehearsing the words I'd already written, once promising myself I would not forget a single one. Sunday came in thin and bright, the kind of Charleston morning that lays a silver film over the river and asks you to breathe quieter than usual. I ironed a cotton dress and sat toward the back of St. Michael's, where the worn pew ends shine like old shells. When the choir began, I didn't look at the hymn board. I looked at the door, counting the seconds between creaks, teaching my hands to be still on the book. Judge Loretta Kim waited under the live oaks, after the service hat pinned to Grace, as always a strand of pearls catching the soft light. We'd traded casseroles and favors for 20 years, and grief besides. She took one look at me and said, "Walk." We crossed Meeting Street, slow cicadas sawing their endless string, and stopped at the iron fence where the shade held. "Tell me the part that doesn't sound right to your bones," she said. I kept it to parts that could wear daylight. The Spanish I heard, the words he chose, escritura, transferencia poder, the way Paige laughed too quickly and then checked my face. Loretta listened without looking away, as if she were reading music and could hear the brass before it came. "Confrontation is theater," she said at last. "You don't need theater. You need a ledger." She tapped 2 fingers against the rail. Dates, times, exact phrases, who stood where. Copies of what proves the house is the house deed tax homestead. Don't argue at tables. Write at desks. "I already started," I said. "Good," she said. "And Eleanor, don't translate the words that matter. Their color bleeds when you do." By late afternoon, the marsh had warmed to that cinnamon smell it gets before a storm that never arrives. Paige texted, "We're stopping by after dinner. Matthias's parents are in town." I set the good plates on a red checkered cloth and shucked corn. When they pulled up at dusk, the porch lantern found a couple whose posture fit their story. Jorge in a well-cut jacket with salt and pepper hair, Celia in a pale cardigan with a string of pearls that did not know the word cheap. "Buenas noches," Celia said, her smile as rehearsed as Grace before meals. "Muchísimas gracias por recibirnos." The TH slid soft and careful through gracias the way Castilians do it, the way no one from Buenos Aires ever would. "Un placer," I answered, and let my vowels drop the way the Rio de la Plata drops them heavy as rope. "De qué barrio son ustedes?" Which neighborhood? They glanced at each other, hunting. "El Barrio Gótico," Jorge said quickly. In Barcelona, I said easy as butter, and set the basket of biscuits in the middle. "Hermoso." "¿Y cuánto tiempo vivieron en Capital, Buenos Aires proper?" "Ah, mucho," Celia said. "Nosotros tomábamos siesta en Las Ramblas." Paige didn't catch it. Why would she? She was pouring Malbec, glowing with the pride of someone sure she had brought home proof. Matthias squeezed her fingers under the table, all devotion. He did not look at me. We ate shrimp and corn, the kind of meal that asks you to use your hands, and therefore gives you a place to put your nervousness. Jorge admired the crown molding and the joinery on the windows, as if he were remembering to. Celia complimented the porch swing and mispronounced Wadmalaw, as though vowels were wet marbles. "Tom and mate?" I asked them, turning my wrist the way Benjamin used to turn notches in a mast. "Do you drink mate?" "Claro," Jorge said. "Con azúcar morena de Sevilla, with brown sugar from Seville." "Qué raro," I said lightly. "How odd." "En Boedo lo tomábamos amargo." "In Boedo we drank it bitter." "Boedo," Celia repeated, as if tasting a word from a map she had never unfolded. "Muy cerca del Prado." "Eso es Madrid," I said, and reached for the salt. The fan above us clicked unbothered. Paige leaned into Matthias's shoulder, laughing at a story he told about a busker in Palermo who could juggle knives and empanadas. His accent was perfect when he needed charm, bold and musical, the LL softened to shy. It tightened at the edges whenever a fact threatened to pin it to one place. "Your daughter is very generous," Celia said in English, aiming it at me like a compliment and a test. "So segura, so stable." "Steady," I said. "Paige is steady." "Steady," Celia repeated, tasting the S as if deciding which country it belonged to. When we cleared, I brought out a lemon pie and left the kitchen door half open to the night. On the other side of the screen, the yard smelled like cut grass and salt. I rinsed the pie server under the tap and heard the thread of Spanish pull tight in the dining room. "Cuánto más tenemos que aguantar?" Celia whispered. "How much longer do we have to endure?" "Hasta que firme," Jorge said. "Until she signs," Matthias warned. "La señora entiende más de lo que creen. She understands more than you think." The faucet ran. I dried the blade, set the slices on plates, came back through, and asked who wanted coffee, as if I had only ever known English. When they left, there were 2 lipstick ovals on my water glasses and a smear of Malbec on the checked cloth where someone's story had stumbled. Paige stayed on the porch a moment after the car door shut. "Don't you love them?" she asked, not looking straight at me. "They are very fond of their son," I said. "He deserves it," she said finally, and let herself into the passenger seat. The taillights drifted away down the live oak tunnel, then out. Inside, I set the timer on the oven for 5 minutes and wrote while it counted down Gracias, Barrio Gótico, Las Ramblas, Sevilla, Prado, the vosotros that slid out once when Jorge asked for the salt. The way Matthias's eyes cut toward the window when Spanish thickened, not to watch the night, but to measure it. I noted Paige's Tell's cheek-flushed ring finger tapping the glass stem throat clear before a laugh that didn't rise from the chest. I noted the time the front door closed and the temperature on the little dial by the window because the air was a touch cooler than it had been at supper, and details stay put when they are nailed to something else. I called Caleb from the kitchen with the light over the sink and the rest of the house gone soft. He answered on the second ring, steady as a plumb line. "Aunt Nora, I'm not asking you to do anything you can't do," I said. "I'm asking what counts." "Contemporaneous notes count," he said. "Direct quotes exactly as spoken, including language. Names, times, who was present. Keep originals, deed, tax bills, utility in your name. If you can put a witness in the room, do it, but don't start fights to get one." "I didn't start one," I said. "I know," he said. "Don't tip him. Patterns matter more than gestures. If something's a pattern, it draws its own outline." "What about recordings?" I asked. "South Carolina is one-party consent," he said, the way a man reads out tide charts. "But legality and wisdom aren't the same thing. For now, right. Keep your circles small." The oven timer rang and sounded louder than it should have. I clicked it off and thanked him. "Get some sleep if you can," he said, "and drink water. It's hot." After I hung up, I poured a glass and drank it standing up, palms flat on the cool edge of the sink. The house had returned to its small noises, the tack of wood relaxing, a single ice cube, surrendering in the glass, the air unit catching, and then letting go. On the porch, the red checks of the cloth had darkened where wine had dried into them. I folded it anyway, one square clean corner into another, and set it on the chair. Before bed, I took the leather notebook from the coffee can and read what I'd written out loud, once barely above a whisper in the kitchen where no one could mistake it for talking to themselves. I closed the cover when the pages began to smell faintly of lemon and ink. In the study, Benjamin's boat plans leaned in their cylinders like tall men in a line. I slipped the notebook behind them again, reached up and pulled the chain that turns off the green desk lamp. The room went dim. Outside, the marsh shifted with the tide, a long exhale returning the day to the river. I turned out the porch light, locked the door, and let the dark hold what it could. Rhett Morgan showed up in a linen shirt with sleeves pushed to his elbows and a face that had learned to keep expression from getting in the way of facts. He took the chair in Benjamin's study that faced the light and set a flat canvas portfolio on the desk, the kind art students carry when they mean to be taken seriously. When he opened it, the room filled with paper, like a low tide, maps folded to corners, photocopied records, prints of photographs where the same man kept reappearing under slightly different hair. "Mr. Delgado likes good cameras," Rhett said. "They like him back." He arranged the pages in squares, a habit of order that made the scatter feel like a plan. Miami, Austin, Madrid. Names that rode close enough to true to pass through a busy day without stopping. The same posture in photo after photo, hand in a pocket, eyes adjusted to meet whatever person held the lens. Sometimes that person was older and laughing a beat too late. Sometimes a hand with a bracelet crept into the frame half-claimed. "Wire transfers under 5,000, Rhett said, tapping a column. "Space just enough to keep banks sleepy. Rental cars that never cross a state line. In Texas, he was Matias Duarte. In Spain, he signed Mateo Delgado. Same date of birth, give or take a month, depending on who needed it. The pattern pulls its own outline if you stop calling it coincidence. He slid a print across to me. An older woman on courthouse steps in Bexar County, smile, bright hair, set for a day that mattered. The man beside her wore the same look he'd worn in my kitchen when the wine went around, restrained, appreciative, in place. She filed fraud the next spring, Rhett said. Case dismissed for failure to serve. He'd gone. This one, he set another sheet on top, had a hospitality business outside Madrid. A cousin borrowed her tax ID. She found out the hard way in a letter with too many stamps. The paper smelled faintly of toner and hotel hallways. Benjamin's green desk lamp threw an oval of light over dates and stamps and the little ridges where a copy machine had chewed a corner. Rhett wasn't selling chase or drama. He was laying boards, checking grain testing for rot, the way my husband used to tap a hull. Why Charleston, I asked. Rhett didn't shrug. He likes places where a story about reinvention sounds kind. He likes cities that clap for fireworks and trust rings in public. And he likes houses that look like they can't be moved. A mosquito whined against the screen. I looked down at the ledger I'd kept and added 2 lines. Bexar County Steps. Madrid hospitality, as if writing their names would make them stay put. Rhett packed as neatly as he had unpacked. He slid a last page loose and left it resting under the lamp. The photo held a man and a view I knew too well, my porch swing and shallow focus, while his face rode the clarity, one fingertip pressed to Paige's knuckle where she believed him. Keep writing, he said. If he asks you to sign anything, take a breath before you touch a pen. After he left, I went down to the outbuilding. Benjamin called a shop, even when he fixed nothing but small things, toy masts for neighborhood boys, a stand for a neighbor's birdcage, a frame for our kitchen clock. The air there had learned and kept the smell of cedar and marine varnish. I ran my hand over a bench blackened where a soldering iron once burned too long. In a cigar box were scraps of sandpaper cut to thumb size, and a bundle of letters Benjamin had tied with twine the color of tea. The top letter carried a coffee ring and grease at the edge. L he'd written the way he always named me when work was far and home needed a path. If a rib sounds wrong, you don't shout at it. You mark it light, then you work it until the sound comes back. I read it twice and put the bundle back with the scraps. At the kitchen table, I folded my old receipt paper into small boats, the kind you can make with 4 creases if your hands remember how. I sat them along the windowsill to dry, a little fleet facing the marsh, as if it knew which way to point. Paige came by the next afternoon, cleaner and paler than usual, like someone who had been trying to sleep and taught herself the shape without success. She carried a clipboard that had no reason to be in my house. "Mom," she said, not quite stepping past the threshold. "Can we talk without—" She didn't finish the sentence with a name. Matthias drew up a simple thing. "It's a safety move. We put the deed in my name for now, just until—" She didn't finish that either. "It protects you. If anything happens to you, if there's an emergency." "If there's an emergency," I said, "we call a doctor or a truck. The deed stays where the deed stays." She laid papers on the table, thin and ready to cut. "There are other ways to secure it," she said, talking like a brochure. "A trust with me as trustee. A durable power. It's standard. Everyone does it. Everyone who I asked. People who care about their families," she said too fast, then glanced down at her fingernails as if the word had snagged there. I brought out the lockbox with the unpretty things that matter. Tax bills rubber-banded by year. The recorded deed, the homestead exemption letter with my name spelled right and wrong and right again. I set them beside her papers so the edges argued for themselves. "Here is the house," I said. "Here is how it got to be mine. Here is the county agreeing that I live where I live. If you need security, we hire an attorney who sleeps in Charleston and puts their name on the draft." She stiffened, hurt cracking through the shiny half-smile. "You don't think I can manage a simple form?" "I think simple forms are how boats run aground," I said. "If you need me to sign something, I'll read it where nobody is hungry and nobody is in a hurry." She pulled the papers back as if they'd been too close to heat. "I knew you'd make it hard." "What I won't make is quick," I said. She stayed long enough for me to slice a peach and not eat it, then gathered her bag and the words she decided not to say. At the door she paused, seeing the row of little paper boats riding the window light. "What are those for?" she asked. "To keep the glass from feeling naked," I said. She didn't smile. "Matthias has a place off Spring," she said. "It's closer to my work. I'll stay there a while." Her chin set not in challenge, but in the stubbornness of someone who had chosen and couldn't bear the space before consequence. "I'll leave the porch light," I said, "because porch lights don't ask what guests believe." That night I sorted the shop the way Benjamin did when a long job needed a beginning. I stacked the sandpaper by grit, lined the chisels so their bevels marched in a neat, bright row, oiled the hinge that complained every time the vise turned. I took a mason jar down from a shelf and dropped the paper boats inside one by one, listening for the dry whisper of folds against glass. When the jar was half full, it caught the lamp and threw little trapezoids of light on the bench, as if the room understood fleets. Around 10, traffic on the main road thinned to a thread you could pinch. A neighbor's dog barked twice and forgot why. I stood in the doorway where the yard began and the marsh began after that. The tide had left its wet scallop along the grass, and the air smelled more of river than rain. I could feel the shape of the house at my back, its weight, its corners, the way the upstairs hallway throws sound differently than the rooms below. In the morning, there was a text from Paige. "Don't wait up." The kind of message a child sends when she means, "Don't look too closely." I poured coffee and wrote it in the ledger anyway, not for drama, but for pattern. At 9, a man from the hardware store brought a new chain for the porch swing, and we threaded it through together, measuring twice before we cut. In town, someone strung bunting across a storefront, and the first stands went up by the rivermen, hauling coolers that creaked the way oars do when wood is dry. I wiped the cypress rail and let the cloth catch the grit the night air keeps leaving. On the sill, the little boats watched the tide turn without moving. I had no use for foretelling or ceremony. The day was already full enough paper that didn't tell the truth wood that did, and a house that listened to both. By late afternoon, the heat had lifted enough to let the flags breathe. Down by the river, bunting sagged in patriotic scallops from the rail, and a brass band worked through stars and stripes like a saw through pine. I rubbed a clove of garlic over the grill grates and set rib racks to hiss. The new porch swing chain ticked softly each time the breeze found it. On the windowsill, the little paper boats kept their small white line riding the light like minnows. Neighbors drifted in with potato salad in plastic wrap and deviled eggs balanced in molded trays. Judge Loretta arrived with a cobbler warm enough to sweat through its foil. She squeezed my hand in the kitchen 1 second, no words, and moved on to ask a choir tenor about his mother's hip. 2 men I didn't know took plates and laughed easy with whoever handed them corn. They looked like the kind of people you've met twice at church and can't play sleeves-rolled wedding bands and eye that never quite leaves a doorway. Paige texted 5 minutes and then came around the corner in a dress the exact red of ripe watermelon. Matthias followed, shaved clean shirt the color of storm sky smile, tuned to match a holiday. He hugged the women who opened their arms and shook the hands of men who didn't. When he reached me, he held my gaze the way a fencer chooses a distance. "Senora Hayes," he said, "what a beautiful day to celebrate a country." "It does like a parade," I said, and handed him a plate heavy enough to be honest. We ate on the grass under live oaks that made their own star map out of shade. Kids with glow sticks ran lines between blanket corners while the band shifted to waltzes nobody danced to. Matthias told a story about fireworks on the river in Tigre when he was young. Boats shoulder to shoulder, the sky cracked open and fell in gold. People made the sounds people make when they want to be charmed. He obliged them. Paige settled easy against his side, and I caught the new watch on his wrist, clean too bright for a man who said he loved old things. When the choir tenor handed him a sparkler, he shook it and wrote his name in the air like a boy. The 2 men with wedding bands drifted to the edge of the yard where the fence met the dock and stood with plastic cups talking about nothing with their mouths and something else with their silence. At dusk, the world turned copper. Mosquito trucks had come through 2 nights running, and the air tasted faintly of something you shouldn't inhale and do anyway. I refilled water pitchers and passed a stack of plates to a teenager with a flag bandana and a crush on the girl from up the street. In the kitchen, the ceiling fan stirred a spiral of heat and lemon, and I stood for a breath with both hands on the counter to feel the cool through the wood. Matthias's shadow filled the screen door before he did. He stepped into the square of linoleum the way some men step onto a stage. "You made a feast," he said. "You take care of everyone." "Help me carry this pitcher," I said, and set it in his hands. He didn't leave. He set it down. "You have been distant," he said, tasting the D and the T like stones. "Paige worries." "Paige has words she can use when she worries," I said. He smiled without his eyes. "You don't like me, but you like that she smiles." "I like when smiling is honest," I said. The screen door slapped once when he went back out. The room rattled the way a boat does when a wake reaches it late. I took the pitcher with both hands and followed. Night fell swiftly the way southern summer lets go all at once. Someone lit a string of lanterns from the porch to the dock. The band packed their horns into cases, and somebody's uncle tuned a guitar, because he never travels without one. Fireworks would go off from a barge anchored just beyond the bend. The children lined themselves along the rail with their feet through the slats, ready to be impressed. Matthias moved through the dark with light on him. He topped off cups he hadn't filled and remembered names he hadn't learned. When he reached the center of the yard, he made a small sound with his spoon against a glass, not loud a chime in the throat of a room. People turned because people always turn when metal meets crystal on a holiday. Friends, he said, then let the word stretch. Family. Paige looked up at him and lit from inside. Somewhere behind me, Loretta took in a breath and folded her cobbler foil flatter. This country welcomed me, he said. Your city opened its arms. And this home? He paused to let the O in home carry. Gave me a place to learn the language of belonging. Paige. He turned to her and went to a knee that had never touched our grass until now. Mi amor, my love. Will you marry me and let me spend the rest of my days honoring your father's house by the river and you within it? A ring in a small box winked like a firefly that had lost its way. For a second there was no sound but breath. Then Paige said yes, small as a prayer and twice as loud. The yard roared itself happy. The first shell climbed and broke above the bend, white chrysanthemums falling into themselves, then red, then blue. Matthias slid the ring onto her finger and rose into her arms. She laughed the laugh I remember from birthday mornings. The two men at the fence moved. They didn't hurry. They reached the circle the way you reach a shore measured sure. One spoke not loud, his voice plain as news. Mr. Delgado, he said, Homeland Security investigations. Don't move your hands. The ring in Paige's hand threw the red of a new burst across her knuckles. She blinked at the men, then at Matthias, not understanding the shape she was seeing. That's not, she started. Don't, I said, but the word had no place to land. Matthias did not flinch. His smile tucked itself away like a shirt into a waistband. He lifted his chin a degree. You picked a poor night, he said in English, soft enough to read his care to anyone not listening. Keep your hands where we can see them, the taller man said. He turned slightly so the badge on his belt caught lantern light. People had the decency to step back. Paige did not. Tell them, she said to him, palms out as if truth could be held. The shorter man spoke, eyes on Matthias, words falling steady as facts on a ledger. You are under investigation for marriage fraud, identity theft, and wire fraud. We'll talk about rights in a minute. For now, you're not going to reach for your phone. Matthias laughed once the sound too clean. You think a ring makes a crime, he said. I think patterns make a case, the man said. The fireworks threw green across everything, grass faces, the linen of Matthias's shirt. He looked at me then. For the first time since he had come through my door, he looked without choosing how to be seen. There you are, he said to me in Spanish. Voice quiet, vowels gone hard. La madre con dientes. The mother with teeth. Paige's mouth opened and closed around a question with no word for it yet. Matthias, she said, and it broke in the middle. He turned to her and softened everything. Mi cielo, he said. This is jealousy. This is envy. He touched her wrist, and the taller agent shifted a shoe to say enough. The yard had learned to be silent. The guitar leaned unplayed against its chair. A child on the rail asked not unkindly if the show was over and was shushed by a dozen throats. This is a mistake, Paige told the men, finding anger the way you find balance when a deck rolls. No, Matthias said, and the word came round as a coin. It's a plan. He gave me back my stare with interest. She did this, he told Paige, still gentle. Tu madre. She cannot stand your joy. She will burn any room you love to keep you in hers. Something like a wire tightened along my ribs and held. I did not speak. I didn't have to. The taller agent stepped in and took Matthias's wrists and spoke the kind of sentences you only say when you've practiced saying them calm. The cuffs closed with that mechanical letter a wrist makes, that bright, embarrassed click. A cascade of gold fell over the river, hissing all its little lives into the black. Matthias looked from Paige to the house, as if measuring its windows, as if memorizing where the light would fall in winter. You'll regret this, he said to her in a voice he hadn't used before, and the softness went out of my daughter's face, as if someone had opened a door in winter. They walked him past the paper boats, staring out from my kitchen window. He didn't look at them. The men in their wedding bands did the small choreography of a practiced exit side by side, not touching his shoulders, letting him own his feet while they owned his direction. The yard blurred into silence the way rooms do when something heavy leaves them. When the sound of the cruiser faded, people remembered they had dishes. They wrapped foil over things that didn't need it and said sorry in low voices because English doesn't have a better word for that moment. Someone took home a serving spoon that wasn't theirs. Loretta found my elbow and held it through a breath that didn't want to finish. Paige stood in the center of the crushed grass and stared at the hollow where a knee had been. The ring on her finger looked like glass that hadn't learned to be stone yet. She turned to me, and every old fight we'd ever had came to stand behind her. You, she said, not loud. Paige, I said, and my mouth went dry. You invited them into our yard, she said. You made a spectacle and called it help. You turned my life into a... She stopped herself on the word scene and chose another. Into this. I kept the house where your father left it, I said. And I kept you where the light can find you. She shook her head so hard the single bobby pin she still uses the way a girl does slipped and fell. No, she said. You kept control. That's all you ever keep. She pulled the ring off like a sticker that fought a moment and then gave. She looked for somewhere to set it that wasn't me. In the end, she closed her hand around it until the edge cut her palm, and I saw a small, clean crescent of red. "Don't call me," she said, voice flat now, the porch light making a pale field on her cheekbones. "Don't come by. I don't want to see you." The paper plates we hadn't used lifted a little in the river air. Far down the street, someone tried a bottle rocket late, and it popped sad against the humid night. I stood without answer. She shouldered past me and down the path, sandals loud on the wooden steps, then quiet on the road. A neighbor's dog barked twice and forgot. The yard held the imprint of a celebration, like a body after a fever. Cups on their sides, forks in the grass, a heel print deep enough to collect water if it rained. I carried the deviled egg tray to the kitchen and set it beside the sink. The paper boats had not moved. Their white looked whiter after the flashes had stopped. I turned off the lanterns in a row dock rail porch, and the darkness returned with its old confidence. I washed what would wash and left what wouldn't. The chain on the swing ticked once, then let the quiet have its run. In the study, the green lamp threw its familiar oval. I set the ledger on the desk and wrote a single line. 4th of July. Ring, cuffs, Paige red dress. The pen scratched like a match, and then went still. Outside, the river took back the sound it had lent the day and held it somewhere my house could not hear. The yard looked like a celebration that had changed its mind. Flags slack paper cups on their sides, a heel print where the grass would stay crushed for days. I stacked plates in the sink and let the water run until it went cold. In the ledger, I wrote 4 words and stopped ring, cuffs, red dress. The house took a long breath and held it. Rhett came the next afternoon with the heat already sitting on his shoulders. He didn't bother the porch. He went straight to Benjamin's study and set a slim envelope under the green lamp. "There's a woman you should meet," he said. "Camila Duarte, Montevideo. Her name lives in a dozen files that aren't hers." He tapped the envelope. "She's in Savannah for a conference. She'll drive up if you ask." He didn't say should again. He didn't need to. By evening, a sun-faded rental pulled beneath the live oaks, and a woman stepped out with a tote bag and the kind of posture you build behind a front desk. Dark hair pulled back, no makeup, that wanted credit eyes that had read Tired Travelers without learning to be tired herself. "Senora Hayes," she said at the door. Southern vowels gone soft in her Spanish. "Gracias por recibirme." "Come in," I said. "It's Nora." We sat at the kitchen table where the paper boats kept their white line on the sill. Camilla spread a small order of papers: police report, consulate letter, a photocopy of a passport with her face, and a number the world had learned to use without her. She spoke steady, as if steadiness could pin facts to the page. "Un hombre me pidió mi CV," she said. "A man asked for her resume. Para un trabajo en hotel." She scanned her passport for him the way you do when opportunity knocks, and the door isn't cheap to open. Months later, credit checks she hadn't applied for a lease, she hadn't signed a phone plan billed to a city she'd never seen. Then messages from women, older kind voices, asking after a cousin, a sister, a fiancé Camila didn't have. "Usó mi nombre como si fuera un abrigo," she said. He wore her name like a coat. When she finished, the air in the kitchen had the feel it gets after a storm that never throws lightning, only rain. I poured her water and set the glass where the wet ring could leave a mark if it wanted. The front door clicked light as a thought someone tries not to think. Paige stepped in without knocking. Her hair was pinned up as if she'd done it in the car at a light. She stopped when she saw Camilla, then looked at me with the bluntness of a child who has fallen and needs to understand the ground. "This is Camila Duarte," I said. "Her name has been busy without her." Paige moved closer the way you move near a dog that might spook. Camilla stood so they were eye to eye. She didn't reach out. She didn't smile like a nurse or a saint. She simply offered the page with the passport copy, then the police report, then the letter that called a number stolen and told a person to prove she was herself. "I don't know you," Paige said, voice thin, "but everything about you is the proof I couldn't see." Camilla shook her head once small. "He's good," she said, English careful. "He makes needs look like love." Paige glanced down at her hand. A faint crescent of red marked her palm where the ring had cut the night before. She rubbed it without meaning to. "I wanted the story," she said. "I kept feeding it until it fed me back lies." No one filled the silence. Outside, a mockingbird tried on someone else's song and kept it. Paige's face went slack, the way faces do when weight slides off and leaves heat behind. She turned toward me and didn't ask for forgiveness because forgiveness is a word too big to carry at first. She stepped forward and put her forehead to my shoulder like she did the year she was 9, and the dog ran off and came back with briars in his ears. "I'm here," I said, which was all I could promise and not break. That night, she slept in her old room with the window cracked to the marsh and the fan set on low. I left a glass of water on her nightstand and shut the door until the latch whispered. In the kitchen, I set Camilla's papers back into their envelope, smoothed the corner that had bent, and thanked a woman whose name had been asked to do too much work for too long. July turned its pages with both hands. The town hosed confetti off sidewalks and took down the bunting. In the mornings, Paige made coffee without asking which tin held the good beans. Sometimes we spoke, sometimes we didn't. She folded dish towels in thirds because that's how Benjamin had done it, and the muscle remembered before the mind did. On a Tuesday, we drove to Savannah because the road pointed that way. Live oaks braided the sky over Oglethorpe and Bull, and the squares gave us shade like a series of small favors. We walked as if the city were teaching us to go slower. On Thursday, we kept going to New Orleans. The air there had a different weight. Music leaked from doorways with its own weather. On Frenchman Street, a trumpet found a line and stayed married to it. Powdered sugar lit our faces like a bad idea, and none of us wiped it away. We talked about nothing that needed a conclusion: oysters, and how they taste like batteries, a dress in a window that looked like dusk, the history of a steamboat no one here had ridden. By the time we came home, the Marsh had traded green for a deeper green, and the porch boards had gone from hot to simply warm at noon. I gave Paige a key to the shop. Not a speech, not a ceremony. Metal in palm in mine, the small private click of one trust choosing another. In the study, we set the ledger between us and wrote our names on the inside cover as if a book could hold more than the weight of paper. She took the homestead letter in her hands and read our address twice, then set it down like it could bruise. That evening, the tide fell hard enough to show the ribs of the creek. Mud shone like something living. I carried the mason jar outside and unscrewed the lid. The paper boat smelled faintly of lemon from the kitchen and dust from the shop. Paige stood beside me without telling the water what to do. I set one boat on the skin of the creek. It held, then tipped, then learned the small grammar of current. Another followed. They moved the way good sentences do, simple, not easy, headed somewhere because the language would have it so. Behind us, the swing chain ticked once. In the study, the green lamp burned its quiet oval. The house didn't say anything. It didn't need to. The boats thinned along the bend, and the Marsh learned them in one by one. When the jar was empty, I turned it over and let the last dry sweetness of paper shake loose into my palm. We stood until the sound of water became the same sound as breath. Then we went inside and left the door to decide how much night to keep. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.